So welcome everybody to another conversation with Heart Community Group. And this week I'm delighted to welcome Andrei Lussmann, who is the fantastic entrepreneur and businessman who's recently interviewed, I noticed, on a podcast called Badass Bosses, which I thought was very fun. Is known for running a group of restaurants that are the most sustainable. So we want to hear about that. Yeah, I know has had a long career in hospitality, and your business, I think, is still growing. And you're in across Hertfordshire and also in other places, Oxford. But start by telling us a bit about who you are, Andrei, and what you do.
Yeah, thank you, Kim, and good morning, everybody. I'll try not to be too boring over the next 30 minutes. And Kim, I'd be very happy if you would direct questions and keep me going if need be. Well, I've been in hospitality pretty much for 32 years, and Lussmann's is a small group of restaurants. The whole idea of Lussmann's was to provide customers with basically the conduit between high-end independent restaurants and what we term as the sort of casual dining chain restaurant on the high street. So what you have is the best of both worlds. So from a business perspective, you've got something which is accessible in that the chains are value driven. It's something that is you have a consistent product, and independents are usually famous for being having flair, and they're quite pioneering, and they're quite intuitive, and they can change, and they probably have better ethics and better values. And I thought quite often you don't get the two coming together. So can we do what Pizza Express did 30 years ago on the high street and say we can provide you with something which is best in class in terms of casual dining, but without it being pompous or preachy or too expensive. And the view was, and it has been a project, that you can. One could argue that there are different demographics and different parts of England that might struggle with Lussmann's, but the general gist of it is that we're only a couple of pounds more than Pizza Express in terms of our entry-level set menu, which is available 7 days a week. And the view was to try and make it not about being entitled or something which was for people which were very wealthy, but opening the demographic to everybody. And that's one of the reasons why we don't have pubs that you'd have to drive to. The idea was you could get a train, you could get a bus, you could walk, and it would be more egalitarian, classy but classless, something that lots of different types of people from lots of different backgrounds would appreciate and come to like, as opposed to being something for a particular community only. And obviously, we started off as a coffee shop in London. And I think after being robbed 3 times and getting fed up with parts of London, I thought we need to really open a restaurant where we'll have a community that supports what we do. And that's why we came to Hertford. And the relationship with Hertfordshire began back in 2004.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And I know I know that you really value the ethics and sustainability of everything you do, not just in terms of provenance of ingredients, but the way you treat your staff and recycling, and as you've just said, even where you put your restaurants. Can you talk a bit about why that's so important to you, how that started?
I grew up, and I remember growing up with compassion and world farming being very important. And I always felt that, if we're going to eat out, then restaurants should make more of an effort to demonstrate the provenance of the product is good. And I was always of the understanding that, the spirit, the value of the animal is in essence really important. And unfortunately, eating out, restaurants are very good at using the word quality, but actually on the whole, we're really crap at demonstrating that we believe in provenance and we believe in terroir and community and the importance of how animals are treated. And I hate to say it, we haven't really improved very much in contrast to the huge, a massive explosion that restaurants have gone through from the days of Bernie Yin's and Pizza Hut and Pizza Land in the 1980s to where we are today, where, you know, we're all eating out. You know, we've come from a time where we didn't eat out. We were lucky to go to a pub. Invariably, we sat in the pub garden or maybe the pub car park. We definitely didn't go into pubs. And restaurants were something for your 70th birthday. You know, it was sort of, you know, thick pile carpet. You know, it was flock wallpaper. And it was a very harsh environment that you felt very uncomfortable in. And in light of that, you know, my view was, as restaurants are becoming more continental and have opened up and become a lot more value driven, albeit, you know, I would question the quality. I grew up in a world where compassion in world farming and the importance of where meat came from was paramount. So I thought, can we try and do that in restaurants? And that's where it all began. And that was very important to me. And I thought sustainability in the early days was all about provenance, was all about the importance of the, you know, what protein you put on the table, where it comes from. And I suppose the last 32 years and 21 years of Lussmann's, I've come to learn that sustainability and ethics actually is far reaching. And the provenance side and what you put on the table is a very small part of it. In simple terms, it's actually quite sexy from a customer perspective, because, you know, you can talk about provenance and people are very interested to a certain extent in regards to what they eat. They're not really interested in whether your lighting is LED, whether you're recycling your food waste anaerobically. They don't really care about whether you've got some sort of program of reducing water in your loos and all the rest of it. I'm not going to go through the variety of things that you look at. And I fear that we still live in a world, however educated, you know, St. Albans or, you know, the towns that we're sitting in, we still live in a world where the ethics and the provenance and the importance of sustainability still ranks rather low on the list of criteria of why we go to eat somewhere. And I still feel that, you know, charming staff, a very cost-effective menu and something that's consistent is what people are after, alongside, you know, the food that they want to enjoy. And I think consistency is the most important thing, because I find that if customers would go to a restaurant which was very ethical and sustainable and did everything really very, very well, but the staff were miserable, or the pricing was wrong, or the food didn't always taste quite what you'd hoped, you'd probably say, you know what, or, you know, I might not go back. It's just not consistent with what I want it to be. In fact, I want to leave home where I make all those decisions and just enjoy a nice meal away with my partner or someone else's partner or someone else's family or my family, whatever it might be. And in light of that, I thought, right, we've got to make sure that even though sustainability and the ethics of what run the business are within the bedrock of the decisions we make, from a customer perspective, you can't, until now, I have felt that you can't go around shouting about it, because it comes across very preachy. A lot of people don't want to hear it, and they certainly don't want to feel as though they're being lambasted or they're being, they want to feel as though they're getting away from all those issues, and therefore enjoy the experience of being, you know, in a restaurant or in the theatre or whatever it might be.
Yeah, thank you, brilliant. And I know it's controversial and there's polarization about this, as with everything these days, but what would you say to somebody who said, surely the only truly sustainable restaurant is one that's plant-based only?
Okay, so sustainability is quite an ambiguous word, I have come to learn, and it means all of nothing to many people and much of everything to others. So, you know, it's a bit like free range pork farming in the UK. There is no legal definition, so there's a lot of greyness and discussion, and we all like to have laws and disciplines in which we can then arc our argument around. Of course, you know, if we're going to live off hominy pie or, you know, a vegan diet, you know, and run a business like that, one could argue that that's probably has the least effect from a carbon perspective, because that's what we're all coming down to, is in terms of beyond carbon neutrality, is can we become carbon deficient? Well, my argument would be, we're not going to change much today, it would seem, and it is moving slowly, the dial. And my job is to really move a cohort of customers away from the groups that do it badly. And therefore, you know what, maybe we just don't do it quite as bad. And in fact, along that journey, we are very transparent. And in what we do, we can demonstrate we do a lot more than anybody else. So I think the premise of anything must be reliant on, you have to be business minded. The business must work, because, business can sometimes come in, for a bit of a hard time. But the bottom line is if you employ people, then probably the most sustainable thing you can do is employ that person, which invariably makes a wage. Invariably, that person then can make a decision as to what they want to do, and they can vote, and they can change things. I think that's really important. So I think in the end, to be in business is a sustainable thing. Now, that might be quite controversial on some things, but we have to be pragmatic. And in addition to that, I feel that if I can just demonstrate that we are moving the dial and moving customers away by those who are interested, the small minority, and those which aren't interested, without realizing they're eating with us rather than eating at another restaurant, which doesn't do anything, then by being a little bit Machiavellian, you could say we are taking them with us. Because customers don't always want to hear about what you're doing. They want to come across it. They want to love the food. Staff are charming. It's not expensive. It's consistent. And all the other stuff about sustainability, whatever, we're not here for that reason. And on that basis, I think that, yes, we're probably not going to be as sustainable as a plant-based restaurant. But for today, customers will carry on eating out. Midwives will carry on helping people give birth. We still have people which are undertakers. So I think it's a central part of society. And what we must do is motivate, customers to come away from restaurants that don't do the right thing. And it's not always about government legislation. It's just about education. It's about taking an interest and looking outside. And a lot of educated customers who eat at the restaurants quite often take the view that when they leave their home, where they will eat well and they'll be very aware of making ethical and sustainable decisions, they suspend their perspective on what's right and wrong, just to have a nice evening out. And I shouldn't, rate them. I shouldn't pull them across the coals and say, you're not doing your job as a human. That's irrelevant. I will just make sure we're providing them with an alternative to the dross, in my humble opinion, that is out there.
Yeah, thank you. So I know, we when we had that great conversation outside the pub in St Albans, I was communicating to you where our group is coming from, which is, we're not mainstream. We are what we would describe as collapse aware. We believe we are in an emergency. And you're a very busy man. You work hard, very, very long hours, I know. And your focus is understandably on your growing business. Now, how aware or educated do you think you are about the scale of the climate and ecological emergency and the whole poly crisis? And how does that factor in, if it does, to your plans for the future? Sorry, it's a long, complicated.
Yeah, and I might forget parts of it, so you might have to steer me. Clearly, I'm not as aware as you are, or your group is, and I'm always telling myself I need to work harder at reading more and educate myself better. I suppose the fundamental view of what I was doing was to say, well, whilst we have people eating out, I'm going to be able to demonstrate that I'm going to do it in a way that's best in class and takes into consideration all the issues that we're aware of, without losing the dimension of being a business that fails. So better half the artisan than the dead artisan. Yes. Now, I don't understand fully what collapse aware and the emergency community that you are and how you see things. I'm not fully aware of it, clearly. And unfortunately, when you run 5 restaurants and you're independent and you have a very, a number of children in a busy old world, you do find that you spend a huge amount of time on business and reacting to things at home. And it's only when either you sell a business or the children become old enough, you suddenly have time maybe to reflect on other things. So I'm always aware that I need to know more. And part of the opportunity of being invited was to understand more about what you're doing. I do have hope. I have to have hope, because if I don't have hope, then it's all over. So I do get up in the morning and I am faced with an assortment of issues that come across my desk regularly, because restaurants are quite a fluid and fast-moving business, with supplies. Can you imagine? We spend £2 million on food and drink, and things are constantly changing. We have an ever determined customer base that expects more, pushes harder, wants more, feels that they deserve more, for less. And it's a tough ask, in which to say, well, actually, we're not charging more than the Ivy. In fact, we're cheaper than the Ivy, and we're a little bit more than the Coat, for example, on the high street. And those two businesses, in my opinion, don't do anything.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of customers out there maybe are, again, the dials may be moving slowly, but they're not knocking on our door about what we're doing. They're knocking on our door because it's a nice, good, consistent place with charming staff and good food.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to do, or we want to do, is, like you were saying about your customers, we certainly don't want to be hectoring or preaching or anything like that. You do a fantastic job and you provide a great service. And I'm very happy to send you stuff, out with this conversation if you're interested. But
always interested, yes.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. So I think we'll open it up now. Who's got a question for Andrei? Yes, Chantal, then Martha.
Hi, Andrei. Nice to see you again.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I think it would be helpful, thinking about other people that might listen to this later on. I think it would be helpful to hear a few of you talk about sort of doing the right things, and you started to talk about some of the things that you think about. I think it would actually be nice to hear some examples of those for other people that might listen to this later on, who are maybe thinking about food businesses or already entrepreneurs in the restaurant business. So I appreciate that there's an element of competition here, but ultimately, don't we just want restaurants to just up their game like you talked about? So could you share some of that with us?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, I mean, we break it down into three simple strands. The first is the one I touched on before, which was the importance of provenance, because that's the stuff that, we're a restaurant, so therefore we cook food, and therefore that's what people digest. And it's quite an intimate transaction when you think about it, in terms of you're dealing with trust. Strangers quite often are entrusting upon this restaurant to eat something that they've got no idea really if they can be trusted, and it goes far beyond, in my opinion, the scores on the doors, which is the council-driven system of advising whether you're a clean restaurant or not, and it's a 1 to 5 score. You're happy to know that we're 5, so nothing to worry about that. So the provenance is, we've always maintained that the food which we place on the table. So, for example, 95% of the food which we have at the table is British. Now, that's not a Brexit thing. It's purely about trying to maintain that food miles are reduced, and we are working with communities which are British. And furthermore, it means that we have a handle if things change. So that's one big thing. A second part to that, although I'm well aware that sometimes, you get tomatoes from Italy and the carbon footprint is far smaller than having it from Cornwall. So it is a complex world that does tend to change. The second part is we've always maintained that, in terms of meat, the meat is, if not, soil associated organic, which essentially is the king's standard in production. And most of our meat has been over the years. We make sure that it's British, it's traceable, it's outdoor reared, and we're buying directly from the farm. So there's an immediate relationship there. And this is difficult, doing all this, it costs a lot more, and customers don't want to spend the extra. Of course, with fish, we work with MSC, which is the only internationally accredited kite mark, which is a legal premise of various disciplines that have to be have to be met, and that's a code of chain of custody and a variety of disciplines that we must meet. Again, it's difficult. Sometimes we have customers saying your fish is a bit boring, and I'm like, yes, it's boring because we can demonstrate that the fish which we have is either wild and therefore it's coming from fisheries that can demonstrate that it's growing more than it's dying out, because obviously fish security, food security across the world is a major issue, rather than just having any fish that we like. And over the years, we've stopped many species of fish being sold on that basis. But it does mean sometimes it's a bit boring. And we have that issue with our puddings, because apart from the pineapple, which is the only dessert, the only ingredient that we've pulled in because of the vegan community, and it's not their fault, but we're just trying to be a bit more exciting. We've always had for 21 years only seasonal fruit, apart from lemons, obviously. And lots of customers have said, well, that's very boring. And I'm like, well, we're only working seasonally, so again, but there's an example of, trying to work with, trying to create interesting and quality dishes, whereas our competition will do as and what they want to do, and no one really asks enough questions. So these are standards in terms of the provenance that we've introduced, and that goes alongside all our beer, all our sparkling wine, all our soft drinks. Everything is, apart from wine itself, and though sparkling wine is doing very well on the south coast, they're about 150 years away from actually making any money. Well, no, we don't know what's going to happen in 150 years. We won't be here to know whether it's been a success. But and then we move on to staffing. Now, I suppose I'll start off on trunk. Trunk is a service charge. Service charge is what you get add on to people's bills. It's a very erroneous and a very ambiguous area, and the government thankfully are bringing in legislation from this white paper in April this year, determining that restaurants have to make sure that 100% of what we as consumers add on to a bill, which is an optional charge as service, goes to the staff in that restaurant. And we've been doing that for 21 years. We've always given all the tips, in fact, to our detriment, because what happens is with our competition is that the legal framework for tips, which is a huge part of welfare in staff, is part of what they earn, is kept by the company, which is legally allowed, and then they will feed out a small proportion of it back to the staff. And we find at Lussmann's, we actually pay our staff 35 to 40%, front of house at least, more than the next best restaurant, which actually one could argue is probably too much. So we are looking at that. But the bottom line is, for many years, we've been not ahead, but we've been on a different planetarian orbit in regarding the way in which we service our staff. And that's been a huge part of the way in which we look after our staff. And there's a variety of other things we'll do with our staff in respect to their relations with us, but I'm not going to go through all of that now, because I think trunk is a huge part of it. But, things like, we'll make sure that they have, more time off, and they have the opportunity they don't work ridiculous hours, because hospitality has been, famous for working ridiculous hours. So we'll make sure they don't do more than 4 shifts in a row. They'll make sure they get between 2 and 3 days off a week. We'll make sure that they have the chance to cross train, and a variety of other bits and pieces. But most importantly, you're creating an environment where they have a career, because many of us aren't, we're not university types. We have skills and competencies, and we have abilities that quite often are overshadowed by, you must go to university. And therefore, hospitality is this wonderful melting pot of different nationalities and different cultural, people of different cultural and sexual and religious backgrounds, who come together and actually have an opportunity to excel and blossom. And that's what really we're trying to do in hospitality, and also at Lussmann's, is say, right, let's try and create some levers and some opportunities and a mechanism by which they can develop themselves. And of course, then you talk about the boring stuff, which is the estate. What do we do? So we did work very hard on a closed loop organic system of moving all our food waste into an anaerobic digestion, into a closed loop organic composter. We realized that the carbon footprint actually was a disaster. So now it's all anaerobically digested for us, creating energy. We've been doing that for many years, to a large extent, to a much more expensive way of doing it, because for years people have put their food waste into their normal bins, which aren't weighed. But food waste bins are weighed. In the last few years, we've had to pay extra for it. We are now looking, with the arrival of a potential restaurant that has a space for it, to look at actually getting all that food waste back, to actually create our own compost, which can then sell back to the restaurants, to the customers' should they wish to have it. And then it's things like we moved our entire estate across to LED lighting. We reduce and review our water. So it's all about utility reviews in regards to the cost. And in addition to that, we started doing some central production. So therefore, rather than having all our supplies go to all the different restaurants, we have a lot of supplies which go to central distribution, which we then distribute from ourselves across the restaurants. So that helps in terms of, well, it just helps in terms of carbon, and it also helps in terms of consistency of product and making sure that we've got the right stuff in the right place. And there are numerous other things which we do that will come to mind as we talk that I might bring up. But there's a whole assortment of things that we've been doing for many, many years, whether it's all the waste which we've created. We recycle everything, So we moved our fish man many years ago from the poly boxes onto waxed boxes, and then they get washed and they get recycled and reused. We're moving our gin man from, making his gin, which will become our gin very soon, to we recycle the bottles, and we'll have the gin arriving in a 25-litre, container. That'll be an interesting sort of moonshine moment in terms of distributing it. We're just going through that because you have to make sure you find someone who doesn't want to drink. The best care in the world, you might find you've got all sorts of problems. But so we have spirits which are arriving now, which are British made, which are paper bottles and biodegradable sachets inside. And even during COVID, when we did our 500,000 meals to go during that difficult time, we still made sure there that everything we had was biodegradable and compostable, even though it was a very difficult time. So the estate stuff, which is not very sexy, is something that we're having to constantly look at and review in regards to what little things can we do that incrementally improve our position. And of course, this is all pulled together with us having to do our carbon review. And I'm looking at Planet Mark now. We did do a carbon review 2 years ago with the University of Sheffield, who provided us with the statistics and data. But I think, like most things, there's 150 ways of cooking a piece of fish. There's 150 people out there telling me how to do a carbon review, and that's somewhat difficult for someone like me because I haven't got time. And I just want to say, I want someone to say, that's how you do it. That's what we've done. And that's what you need to do. Now go away, and I'll go away, and we'll make it happen. But you speak to 3 or 4 different parties, and they all come back with a different variation. It's like, this is not helping. Because all we want to do is demonstrate that we're not, that we actually are making the right decisions. And an example of that was which we reduced our menu from 24 main courses to 12, and we reduced our menu from 4 beef items to 1. And this brings me back to the original point, which is we all know beef, whether you eat beef or not. Beef has a major carbon contributing factor. So bringing it down to 1, was an example of trying to bring our customers all along with us. And a lot of those customers probably aren't in, they're not in the conversation. They're not part of the narrative. They're not really interested. They just want to come to Lussmann's because it does what they wanted to do. And that was tough because when you reduce a menu by half and then you reduce the biggest selling item on any menu, which is beef, from 4 to 1, you suddenly realize, you might lose customers. And the most important thing is that we keep on attracting customers, because I've got 125 staff that have mortgages and lives and they're stakeholders in the business. And we all need to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that we must remain in business, So these have been difficult and challenging moments in the business, and we continue to challenge ourselves because with this Planet Mark, I'm obviously going to be looking at our business for another kite mark in regard to reflecting on the 2-3 scope process of getting to carbon negative. And of course, running a restaurant, you're buying a restaurant and you're not building the restaurant from scratch. So a bit like some of us have old cars. And the view is, get an electric car. Well, I've always been of the view that actually we have to exhaust this asset to its ultimate rather than just getting rid of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just quickly, and all the kitchens we have bought kitchens which are essentially knackered kitchens, from brands and chains that have lost the will to live, in essence, because when a chain hits a certain marker financially, they give up. And they just wait for someone to take it, which is a very sad state. So when we take the restaurant, we invariably we engage with what is already there, and we say, right, we'll use our imagination and we'll work with what's there, rather than saying, right, let's get rid of everything and let's put a lovely, nice electric induction, which is what I'd love to do. So, you are sometimes working in a very pragmatic and real-time moment, as opposed to being holistic with grand views of let's actually have a totally carbon zero, because obviously restaurants create a lot of carbon, and one of the biggest areas is you cook on gas and it creates fumes and carbon in its entirety.
Sorry, my fingers up were a yes to
oh
that.
Right.
I love what you said about not rushing out to buy the next new shiny thing, but actually exhausting and using what you have, because of course the resources that it takes to produce that nice shiny thing, we have to factor in true cost, full true cost. But yeah, so that wasn't stopping you.
Brilliant.
Great question, Chantal. Brilliant answer. Thank you, Andrei. Martha.
I've written down 6 questions and you've covered at least 4.5 of them. So thank you very much. I was just thinking though, it's incredibly difficult to keep up with all of the things that as they change and as the restaurant develops, and then you, like you were saying, you get some people say this is the right way to do it, some people say that's the right way to do it. Do you have a system in your business where you can sort of take all of the information on board and diffuse it and pick it apart and kind of work out which is the best route to use, or what's the most easily applicable to maintain the speed? Because you're obviously setting a new standard for the industry. It kind of also seems like you're trailblazing a route into carbon neutrality as a restaurant. And are you writing it down? Have you got a guidebook I can buy?
Well, there are lots of independent restaurants. Thanks for that question, and it's a nice difficult question. So there are lots of restaurants who are independent that go through this process and do a really good job. Silo, for example, in London, Doug McMaster, he is an example of a trailblazer. He is a pioneer. He is the first zero waste restaurant in the world, and it's very sexy, and I have to applaud what he's doing. But actually, in my world, that's not normal. In my world, what's normal is normal people who want to go to Nando's, or normal people who want to go to the Ivy, and that's just normal. And what I'm trying to do is say, let's make it normal. And in light of that, kite marks and support systems and platforms to work with, there are many out there. I get emails every day from people saying, we can market you better, we can support your sustainable credentials better, we've got this platform, that platform. And I haven't got time to do any of that. So I suppose the 2 bookends that I work between is, one, the Sustainable Restaurant Association, which isn't perfect, but it's the only global kite mark, again, that gives you a tangible and measurable sequence of steps and disciplines to work to. And they offer a star system in light of that. And your audit's every 2 years. So I'm now undertaking my audit now. I am a founding member. It was set up by Leon's founder and Henry Dimbleby. I forget the chap who founded Leon, amongst others. And they're a group of very well-meaning public school boys, and I'm very happy with what they did, because in essence, it doesn't matter where they came from. The actual process meant that there was a platform by which everything from contract catering through to schools, through to a kebab, someone who runs his own kebab shop, to me, can actually engage with and utilize. And now they've sold this audit across to China and Hong Kong and various other parts of the world. So it's the only global kite mark there is. It's not like most of these things, it is not perfect, but it keeps me aware of changing moods. It brings me up to speed with changing demands and legal frameworks, etc. But the other part of the bookend is me, is that like all of us, I'm a consumer, and I'm living in the real world, and I can see what's happening around me, and it comes from my own enthusiasm, I suppose, and passion to do what's right without shouting about it, because I feel that quite often, if you shout about it, you quite often will frustrate customers, and they'll get rather upset by it. So it's about being quite clever in the way where you communicate it. And that's why being our 21st birthday this year, we've decided to change our approach because most people don't know what we do. So clearly our marketing and communication regarding our ethical and sustainable position has been quite poor. And that's me being extremely English and maybe wants to be quite sort of, quiet about it. But the time's come now where we probably need to say to people, listen, you might not know this, but this is what we believe in and this is what we do. So therefore, we're planning on doing that this year. But it's almost that there's too much material out there, and lots of material is really good if you're studying, and you have time to look at all this theory and obviously real time information. But when you're running a business, as I am, and I don't have anybody who is available to manage this for me, it means I have to sort of work quite quickly between what I think is right and what this community advises to be right. And I'm happy to say that we have, since the beginning, reached their maximum 3 stars, but it's not the 3 stars I go for. It's just basically saying we have a kite mark for those which would like to know. And there's about it's a 40-page booklet, and I'm in the middle of doing it now. It takes about 2 weeks to fill in. I mean, it's absolutely exhausting. I mean, because it's all about demonstrating what you're doing. Can we have information and data to demonstrate it in real life, and all the rest of it. And this is this is not easy. You're like, oh, for God's sake, do I really have to go through all this?
Brilliant. Thanks, Martha. Who else has got a question? Chantal, you're being greedy.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking earlier, Andrei, when you were saying about you used the word boring. I think you were talking about when you were reducing the menu and reducing from 4 beef down to 1, and there was something else you said. I'm not sure if the boring comment was in relation to the beef, but more in the sort of the changes that you're making. And I'm sort of thinking that maybe we have to, it's a sort of more of an observation, but also, interested in your view, that maybe we have to kind of redefine boring as the new sexy, a bit like, veganism slowly moving from being like the weird tag-along friend to being like the cool dude at the center of the party. So I think there's an educational thing happening there of what we kind of maybe, of what you might perceive or think is boring to people is maybe, we have to redefine that as sexy somehow from a framing position.
Yeah, and it might be that my generation views all of this slightly differently to my kids' generation, which invariably 25% of them don't drink. I had the opportunity to spend a bit of time with some younger people than I am, when we went to see a supplier, and I was intrigued and entertained and quite engaged by the fact that we walked 25 minutes to somewhere that sold a particular type of ice cream. Now, I've never in my life used my phone and navigated with such desperate desire to get to this place. And I was like, is that what you do? Because I would have just happily meandered around and had a cup of coffee somewhere, and that's that. So I learned that actually, with that in mind, that community are probably saying maybe we aren't boring, and maybe we need to learn to communicate with that community of people saying, hey, we're here. Because all my crowd think we're a bit boring and don't be a killjoy and ruin the day, and or just get on and do what you've always been doing. So we are therefore making an effort. I have noticed though with vegetarianism and veganism is that I was a vegetarian for many, many years. And when we grew up being a vegetarian, again, forgive my generalization, but you sat at the end of the table a bit like, Peter Sellers in The Party, that old film. And nobody really cared about that you were a vegetarian. There was no vegetarian menu. You just got whatever there was, and that was it. And no one spoke about it. Now, the vegan community, which is smaller than the vegetarian community, quite sizably small, I mean, it's a very small community, have come along. And it has changed fundamentally because the younger community says, for example, in an office, there's 10 of us going out for dinner. One is a vegan. Gone in the day, the 10 people would have said, we're going there and not worried about the vegan. It is now the vegan that decides where they're going to eat, because the vegan will decide, we'll eat somewhere that does a good vegan menu alongside other dishes. And that's quite often in families. I've noticed that, a daughter or son has become a vegan and mum and dad say, well, you decide where to go. And therefore, I was having this conversation with a meat producer saying, is all a load of whatever. And I said, well, it doesn't matter what you think, because the bottom line is that the way in which we are eating in the restaurant today is also changing, geared very much by that a tiny minority, where that minority would have never, ever had an opportunity to talk about it, let alone decide where they wanted to eat. So that has changed. So in light of that, our menu now, from a business perspective, because I want vegetarians, but most importantly, vegans to be excited, we've now got 30% of the menu, which is vegan stroke vegetarian, 35% of the menu, of which there's always going to be 2 vegan puddings, even though I don't know what the latest percentage is, but the percentage of vegan is so small. If you compared that to what items we have on the menu, you'd say, well, you have 0.4 of a dish, which was vegan, right? You know what I mean? But we make sure that actually, no, on our set menu, there's 2 puddings and there's 2 main courses and there's 2 starters, usually, which demonstrates that we're listening and we're trying to be more commercially successful in getting vegans to say, you know what, I love their food. They're not a vegan restaurant, but you know what? At least they're ethical about the other stuff they do. And hopefully they make it a bit less boring to a community that might not know about that sort of stuff. So, that's definitely changing.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yes, it's a lot to do with the story that you tell, and we've seen many examples, as you've said, of the story changing and then people's behavior changing over time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Who else? Got some very quiet people here, which is fine. Martha, go for it.
Sorry, I'm absolutely fascinated by you, and I am so impressed. I have so much respect for what you've done. I want to ask you a million questions, but I will try to do my best. I'm trying to tailor them into one short one. You obviously have a lot of staff, and it sounds like you treat them really well, and you've got really good ethos for how that they work through your business and grow and develop. Have you found that it's been enough to create an environment with the foundation of this ethos, and they come on board and they take up the mantra and they go with you? Or do you have to specifically train them to understand what you're doing and why you do it like this?
Thanks for that. I think it's the latter. I don't think we're there yet. There are people who mention that they're aware of our sustainable positioning, platforming, and they're interested in what we do, and that might be one of the key reasons. We all read about the way in which the welfare of how you manage and look after your staff and the sustainability ethos of your business are massive drivers in how younger people come into the workforce decide. I haven't experienced enough of that yet. And I also feel that the only way in which we get them to understand is that we try and pump them with the information and train them and get them to be aware of what we're doing from the outset. I also know that we were very bad at communicating internally. So, it is my plan in 2021 is to try and create sustainability champions without sounding too, I won't be inappropriate, but, it's like, well, okay, so can we find people that in each restaurant which are actually interested and excited by this, who can then help, unburden me with some of the work that's involved, and they can learn more and then be, the mouthpiece rather than being top down. Because the problem is with independent companies, which have started off with a founder or someone like me, is it we're quite sort of strong and sort of determined, and this is how we're going to do it, and it's about learning how to, as the company grows, to let go and allow other people to be entrusted and to be empowered to take on certain elements of the business. The business of hospitality is in a bit of a funny place, because obviously, commercially, and I know, commercials are sometimes, can be perceived as a dirty word, but I do think that, we must appreciate that we've got, it is the essence and bedrock of what makes things happen, and in light of that, we've come across 3 or 4, as we all know, major game-changing, seismic, commercial full stops in industry, since the start of austerity with the Conservatives in 08 to 11, that period, And these usually happen in industry once in 25 years, in a generation. We've had 4 in a quick succession. So I think we are a long way off from being in a place where we can probably start to really focus on harnessing these true values, because there's a lot of swan-like business. Everything's looking fine on top, but it's a lot of things going on beneath the surface. And Brexit, which I think is a disaster in some ways for the business, has, in a positive, meant that we have to reflect and focus and readapt and pivot and look at our own homegrown staff and say, you can come from a middle-class background and work in hospitality. You don't all have to go to university. This is a wonderful, challenging and prosperous career that gives huge opportunity, and I hope that, again, the negative or positive of having to pay for education at university, and that's a conversation, whatever, it at least means that we're saying to a lot of people, actually, you're not going to go to university because we can't afford it, or you don't quite know what you really want to do. So you might need to take a year or 2 out. And you know what? It's a very old-fashioned business hospitality, but it's amazing how many people I come across who have actually studied architecture, and in fact 2 people I know did archaeology, and ended up realizing, I don't know if this was right for us. And this was in the time where you could do any degree and no one minded. And now they're working in hospitality because it is the perfect environment for them to excel and prosper and all the rest of it. So I think we've had a very tough time, and I think all industry has. I think everyone has, for all. And it's been really difficult from those hedonistic days of Tony Blair, where everything was cool and everyone was flying all over the place and there was lots of money and money was cheap and everything was just easy. I think now we have a difficult time. We've had a difficult time. I think we'll continue to have a difficult time. And all the stuff we want to do in regarding looking at the holistic importance of ethics and sustainability and working on carbon and getting staff to buy into it, that's something that will filter through and feed into the business. But it is slow, because we just, it's about saying, how much time do we have? How much money do we have? How are we still struggling with getting the right people through the door in terms of staffing? Because if you turn that tap off, like it or not, that means a huge proportion of individuals that would have come in, and you might say, well, they were underpaid and we were suspending, or we were pushing down the true cost, which is, of course, is correct. That Brexit thing with staffing and all the rest of this happened will have it'll take a long time for things to peter out. And I suppose the one good thing, and I hope we're not an example of this, and I hope, or a casualty, but one of the good things is we've got too many restaurants. We've got too many restaurant tables and restaurant chairs, and and we need to be more progressive and more pioneering and saying, let's get other businesses in there, to improve our high streets, and let's utilize, without going into the high street and all the rest of it, because for so long we've had poor food, poor businesses, zero ethics, no passion, no value set, but we've carried on eating in them. And so this difficult time is starting to push some of these chains to say, right, we need to contract and get rid of these places, which is allowing disruptors and small independents to come into the business. And I'm hoping, you see in coffee is a good example of, everyone's talking about ethical coffee. It's Rainforest Alliance. It might be organic. It's, it's light roast. It's a green coffee. It's Australian style coffee. It's a very different approach to coffee. It hasn't really transferred into anything else in the food industry. So coffee houses, which are new, are quite bombastic and driven to make sure that they can demonstrate the ethics behind their coffee. But that needs to sort of transpire and sort of port over to food and drink generally, which I think we have some way to go.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Yes, Ross.
You sound so surprised. Just curious, really, Andrei. Do you ever get time or the inclination to work in any of your restaurants?
I don't do enough. And I think working in the restaurant is really important, because it reminds you from a holistic perspective how happy your customers are. Because all I deal with, and this is, and we all will appreciate, as a parent, you just deal with quite often negative stuff. It's no different in business. You run a business, you're just dealing with unhappy customers or broken kit or, staffing, recruitment crisis, this and that. And I started, I mean, I look after, for example, every morning at 7:30, I do all the reviews across all the different sites and off all the different portals. And a long time ago, I made the decision, I'm only interested in negative ones. So I only dealt with the negative ones, and all the positives we didn't even read. It was just put to one side. And thankfully, there weren't thousands of negatives, but there were. But by only looking at the negative ones, it was quite. I didn't realize, but it became quite a disturbing experience because you just thought everything's crap. It's all horrible. And now I do all the positives. And I'm happy to say, that 97% of our customers recommend us, although I wonder why it's not 100%, but we're on the way. And that 97% reminds me of the customers which I would be seeing if I was in the restaurant, because invariably you get people to say, we like coming here. We really enjoy what you do. We really appreciate what you're doing. So Ross, when I've done my job really well, in the future, then I will then be able to go back to doing the stuff that I came into this business to do, which was serve customers, be on the floor and enjoy, the rock and roll of it, because that's the only sexy bit of running a restaurant, is actually being on the floor, the wonderful energy and the vibe, and the fact that the vast majority of your customers love what you do. So I haven't made it yet, Ross, but when I've made it, I'll be able to go back, and I honestly mean this, and do what I love doing. I won't have to open or close the restaurant. I'll leave that to someone else, but I'll enjoy the best bits, but we're not there yet.
Hey, thank you. Brilliant.
Fantastic. Well, we're almost out of time, and
Phil's got a question.
So grateful to you, Andrei. Just a very quick thing, which I can't resist asking, and it probably gets you. Phil, did you have a question?
No, it was just to say actually that I'm a fanboy as well, of course, and I live in Harpenden, and I don't go. I get what you're doing, and I don't actually. Probably 95% of the time, I'll only ever eat in your restaurant, because the rest are, as you said, well, you avoided it, but they're crap, and they're just churning out the same old thing. And there are some, I can't believe it, but there are some sort of pseudo-Italian places still left over from the 1970s. So what you're trying to do is bring people with you at the sustainable end. And meanwhile, the tail enders, for some reason, are still surviving there. And I don't get that. So I just acknowledge what you're doing. And I think it's a great juggling act you're doing there to maintain the sustainability angle, which costs you more money, at the same time, all the other economic pressures that are on you.
Well, well, to hear about a regular. So thanks, Phil. I don't know enough. I always feel embarrassed. I don't know. I will often walk in a restaurant and I don't know who the regulars are. And in the olden days I did, and I feel dreadfully uncomfortable and embarrassed sometimes. But it's lovely to hear, Phil. And I'm happy that you pick up on the money, because there are restaurant groups. Dalesford Organic is an example of a very competent, qualified, the wife of Lord Bamford from JCB, who run Dalesford Organic. And my idea was always, you've got to take the Cotswolds out of the ethical or sustainable tag, because it can become like a Burberry tag, where it is only supported by those who have lots of money, and that makes the whole thing irrelevant. And I've often said to the SRA that it's about saying, how do you get the chap who runs his kebab house on the corner of Quick Fit in Hertford, at 2 o'clock on a Saturday night, how do you get him to think sustainably? And it's those businesses up and down the country, which are honourable businesses paying their taxes, who probably don't get it. And unfortunately, it's very much about very well-to-do, middle-class chaps like me who say, oh, well, we must do the right thing, and therefore we'll offer it to, very wealthy families. But it's about saying, how can we make it normal? Like, bio in France, they're organic. It sits alongside normal, and invariably the price difference is almost negligible. It's not there. So we've got so far to go. It's about desexualizing the branding and the styling and the ethos behind it, saying, can we just make it normal? I mean, that's why we work with Phil Stewart at Hammond's End farm for our mutton and stuff. Is that he is organic, but his pricing is good, and he's local. But I think in the end, it's not so much about him being organic, it's about him just being a good farmer on our doorstep that we should be working with, rather than saying, we're going to charge you £1 more per portion for our mutton shepherd's pie, comes from this wonderful organic product because you're buying an organic tag. And I just think it's a tough one because, you know, a lot of restaurants in Notting Hill and nice places get away with it. And it's about saying, no, let's not get away with it. Can we not do what we should all be doing if we're going to run a restaurant that has fish and grill? Can we just do stuff slightly cheaper than we should be and to get everyone buying into it? And that comes down to whole sorts of things, you know, whether the government will ever reduce VAT on eating out and all that sort of stuff. But Phil, thank you very much for that positive support. I didn't realize you're a customer, so thank you.
Well, that seems like a really good point to bring this to a close. Andrei, what I love your optimism, your commitment, your entrepreneurial flair, that you've been so progressive and active in this. I tell you what I love most, though, is actually your authenticity and your humility, admitting what it is you haven't quite got it right yet. So really, thank you for that. And this will be up on our YouTube channel. I'll send everybody the link, and really appreciate your time, knowing how busy you are. Thank you, Andrei. If everybody unmutes themselves and just says goodbye, that would be brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have a nice
you.
day,
Great.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well,
Great.
thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to learning more about the Collapse Aware community, which I don't know enough about.
Great. I'll send you
All
some.
right.
Thank
Okay.
you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Cheerio. Bye-bye.